Alrighty, everyone, I'm going to get a drink of water and we will get going here. Now, I just want to mention here that we are into part 4 of this talk where we're discussing the 7 main aspects of God, which is a little pamphlet by Emmett Fox. Now, if you've missed any of the earlier pieces, they're all available on the YouTube channel. The stream, you can go back and get caught up. And as each one builds on the other, it's probably a good thing to do, just because so much has been covered in the last 3 weeks. Last week we covered the first 2 main aspects. The first couple of weeks we were talking about why it's important to even think about these things, to even talk about these things. And last week we covered life and truth, and this week we're going to start with love. So I think it was just absolutely perfect and divine guidance that Wendy picked that quote that she did. It's amazing how things work out. So just in general, just very quickly to set the stage, we think about what we're thinking about. That's what we talk about here. Is a teaching, not a preaching, for people who like to think about what they think about. And if you consider where anything in our lives takes place, it takes place in this thing we call consciousness, this thing we call our awareness. Even when we are engaged in something that has a physical sensation to it, I think of, of course, can't go there now, but when the pool was open, and we'd go and get in the pool and swim. And the physical sensation of the water, when you get in, it's kind of cold, and everybody goes in slowly, And then once you get in, your whole body is immersed in this sensation, and you start swimming, and you feel the muscles moving and all those things. But where is that awareness taking place? It's not taking place at the skin. It's taking place somewhere in this thing that we call consciousness, this thing that we call me. And yet, if you try to ask what consciousness is, if you try to get a definition of consciousness, we don't really understand. We talk about thinking. We say, well, I had a thought, or I'm thinking this, or I'm thinking that. Are we really? Do we really understand the process by which we become aware of thoughts? I mentioned a few months ago I picked up an article about a book, and then I picked up the book, but I didn't understand it. But the article broke it down and made it accessible to me. But there's a gentleman named Peter Caruso who is a philosopher of consciousness. Now you talk about, how's that for a job description? What are you? I am a philosopher of consciousness. But his field of study is to try to understand, well, what is this thing that we call consciousness? Do we really even know what it is? And I love what he said, the way he put it in there. He said, it's more like a field of awareness. And to me, the image that I got was sitting in a movie theater, and you're sitting there waiting for the movie to start, and the screen is just blank. And something appears on the screen, and that's our field of awareness. And we become aware of that image, however it presents itself to us. Some people hear it, some people see it, some people feel it. But we become aware of something, and we say, oh, I had a thought. But did we really, or did we just become aware of the thought? So not to go too far afield with that, I'm just pointing out that life as we experience is experienced in our consciousness, even though it might be a physical sensation such as swimming in a pool. And the only place we're ever going to grow, and the only place we're ever going to discover more of God, is in our own consciousness. We may read a book, we may listen to a Sunday talk, we may watch a lecture on a video. But all of those things, all they serve to do is to be a stimulus for our consciousness. So our growth then, our spiritual growth, involves constantly updating our consciousness about God. What do we think about God? This is why every January 1st, in every religious science church, there is the first talk of the year is always the thing itself, the thing itself. And Dr. Holmes used the term thing just to cause us to think. Because if we use the word God, everybody has a different interpretation of what that word means. But we all assume that we have the same interpretation, and we don't. So by using a different term, it causes us to explore our concepts. Now, our Wednesday night group, we've been reading from Richard Maurice Buck's book, Cosmic Consciousness. And Buck was a psychiatrist who kind of explored the phenomenon of what we would call the mystical experience. He called it cosmic consciousness. He had such an experience himself. He was a doctor, and he said, what was that? What happened there? And he wanted to explore it. But in his book, in the chapters that we're reading, he's kind of laying out the evolution of consciousness over hundreds of thousands of years. And he said, well, what sets human beings apart from other creatures on this planet? And he said, the most important thing that we can recognize is our language. We can take a mental image, we can take a concept, we can take an idea, and we can express it through language. And to his teaching, to his writing and his way of thinking, he says that is an important distinction, that language and the ability to think conceptually must go together. So his assumption then is that creatures that don't have an evolved language, do not have an evolved consciousness, do not think in deep concepts. They may react to stimulus. When we lived down there in Wilmington, some of the hiking trails that you could go on, you could see the Venus flytraps, which only grow like in a 75-mile radius of Wilmington. And it's a little carnivorous plant, and it's very attractive, and the fly lands on it, and somehow that plant knows to close and eat the fly. But we don't believe, we don't have reason to believe that there is a thinking awareness going on inside that Venus flytrap. It's not like it's, ooh, here comes a fly, I better get ready. It just reacts to the stimulus. Something lands on it, somehow it senses that, and then it just reacts. So that would be like a simple consciousness, very simple, maybe just reacting, but not thinking, not developing concepts. So his point is that as consciousness evolves, language evolves with it. And back at the time when the New Testament was written, Aramaic was the predominant language. And they only had about 4,000 words in that entire language. So each word had many different connotations, many different meanings for the one word. And when people were speaking or reading, they had to draw the meaning of the word from the context in which it was used. I don't know if you've ever tried to study a foreign language, but one time many years ago, I found a book at the used bookstore, and it was a science fiction novel. I think it was like Fahrenheit 451 maybe, but it was in German. It was written in the German language. And I said, well, this would be a great opportunity for me to learn German. I took a little bit in college, but never really did well with it. So I also picked up a English to German, German to English dictionary. And I opened the book, and I read the first sentence, and I looked up each word. Each word I looked up in the dictionary. And I looked at that sentence, I had no idea what it said. None whatsoever. Because the words, I didn't have the context. I didn't understand. And I read the next sentence, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Finally, I took the book to somebody who read German, and I handed it to them, and they read the first paragraph to me. And I said, now how in the world did you decide that this word meant that, when it could also mean this or the other thing? And they said, well, from the context, you have to look all around the word and see how it's being used. So in the Aramaic language, there was only like 4,000 words, and each word had many different connotations, and they didn't have vowels. And the way that the vowel sounds were indicated was, they call it a dot or a jittle, like might call it dots and dashes, little annotations or marks placed around the vowels. So you might think of if you have the letters L and V in our language, what could that be? Well, it could be love, it could be live, it could be lava, maybe some other things as well. And what would designate the difference would be where these little dots and jittles were placed around those letters, and that's how people knew them. And my point is that for us now, far removed, a couple thousand years later, looking at something that was written in a language so long that was popular so long ago, that was very limited in its scope, our ability to just completely understand that is limited. We have to understand that. So we have to understand that as human consciousness evolves, as we grow, we start to develop different concepts and different words and different terms to go with something. As we were talking Wednesday night, if you think of the word snow, you and I, especially me living here in the South, we've got one word for snow, and I think it's panic. But the Eskimos have like 40 different terms for snow because they have more experience with it. They have more exposure to it. They can recognize 40 different types of snow, and they have 40 different terms for it. So as you and I grow in our concept of God, in our understanding of the experience of the divine, the words that we use, the ideas that we have, will be constantly being updated. And this is why we say, if we're going through life and we have the same concept of God that we had when we were 4 or 5 years old, it's an opportunity for us to grow. It's an opportunity for us to update. And our curiosity is kind of the driver or the motivation for that. And I've said this before. I kind of chuckle at the character Forrest Gump. He seemed to have absolutely no curiosity whatsoever. What Mama told him, well, that was true. What Lieutenant Dan told him, well, that was true. What President Johnson told him, well, that was true. Just when anything anybody told him, he accepted as face value. And the satire to me of the novel is that he was extremely successful in his life. And I think the author was in a tongue-in-cheek way saying, if you want to be successful in this life, don't ask questions. Just do what you're told. But our curiosity, if you think of the one thing that the divine gave to us that would assure that we would seek it out, it's our curiosity. We want to know. We want to know. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? So we want to know more of the divine, but where are we going to know that? And the only place we're going to know it is within our consciousness. And it's not something that somebody else can pour upon us. It's not something that somebody can hand to us. But it is something that we evolve. We evolve. Now there's two ways that we do that, two primary ways we do that. One is through, well maybe three, let's say three. One is through our education, our thinking, our reading, listening to a talk such as this. These kind of things stimulates ideas, gets the wheels turning, The second way is through prayer. We spend time, but again, Emmett Fox tells us there's 3 different levels of prayer. But we spend time thinking about God. We spend time updating our concepts. But then there's the experience. There's the actual experience, the experience of the mystical, the experience of the cosmic consciousness, as Buck would call it, the actual experience, or as Dr. Holmes put it, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine, the conscious realization of the experience of the presence of the divine. So if we are to grow, if this is truly our desire to grow spiritually, to grow in wisdom, to grow in understanding, to grow in the experience of God, we think about what we're thinking about. We ask ourselves, what is our concept? We take our concept of the divine into prayer, and we also sit in meditation, not necessarily thinking, not a guided meditation, which they're wonderful, but I'm not talking about those. But I'm talking about being still and knowing. And the reason, again, this is important is that whatever our concept of God is, that is what sets the tone for the rest of our life. If we believe in an angry and a mean and a punishing God, our life will have that experience. If we believe that the divine is going to send us trials and tribulations and challenges and sickness to punish us or to test us, that is the kind of life that we shall have. Right? It is done unto you according to your belief. That's kind of the message of the New Testament. It's done unto you according to your belief. Seek first the kingdom, which is the presence and the activity. And where are we told to seek that? We're told to go within, to go within, to go within in secret to our prayer closet, to go into the solitude of our own consciousness. So what Emmett Fox is telling us then is our life is our practice. Our life is our practice. We all go through life. We all have seemingly challenges, obstacles, problems, seeming problems to overcome. And these are all opportunities for us to ask ourselves, what do I think about God as it relates to this situation? Now, we're not saying that God sends you a problem to force you to think. But what the flip side of that is, I have the problem because of the way I've been thinking. I have the problem because of some way that I have been believing. So therefore, it is an opportunity for me to reflect upon my belief system. What is it that I think about God? I can't remember which pope it was, but it might be like 10 or 15 years ago. And theologians wrestle with what is called the problem of evil, which is, if God is so good, why is there pain and suffering in the world? And that question was more or less, not exactly those words, but more or less put to the Pope, and his answer was, well, if it wasn't for the darkness, we wouldn't appreciate the sunlight. Probably as good an answer as there is. But I think what we want to do is get out of our mind the possibility that God deliberately sent us a problem or a challenge to test us or to punish us. Because if it created us out of itself, if it knows us as part of itself, it doesn't know that we need to know anything. It doesn't know that it needs to punish us, or it would be punishing itself. But yet we do have these experiences of sin, of sickness, of problems, of all those other things. And we have those because in some way our consciousness is separated from the divine. We've been allowed to go off, like the prodigal son, we've been allowed to go off and wander around for a while and try to make our own way. And sometimes we get ourselves stuck in the pig pen. But we have to come unto ourselves. We have to recognize what we are, an experience of the divine, an ambassador, if you will, of the divine. So what Emmett Fox is telling us then is to pray scientifically, in his terms, to pray scientifically, is to consider whatever the problem is that we're working on, and then consider the opposite of that. And consider the opposite of that as one of the 7 main aspects of God as he lays it out. And Wendy's lead-in quote was just so perfect. And we didn't coordinate, by the way, we don't. She picks what she feels inspired to pick, and it just kind of goes together. But love. Today we start off with the aspect of God called love. Now, love is kind of, I would say, one of the most powerful emotions, feelings that we have as human beings. There's more books been written about it, songs been sung about it, poetry, movies, wars have been fought over it, wars have ended over it, kings have given up their thrones. And love, the best definition that I know of, is the experience of unity, the experience of oneness, the experience of the presence of the divine. So God is all there is. We learn that as children. We repeat that by rote in our Sunday school classes. God is all there is. God is everywhere present. Actually, it says all presence, but we are kind of taught everywhere present. But God is perfect love, you see. Perfect love. Because it is perfect unity. It is perfect oneness. There is no other. There is no other to the divine. It has no sense of other. It only knows itself. It is perfect love. Excuse me, got to get a drink here. So there's two important points there. One is, if God is all there is, who or what does God have to be afraid of? And the answer is nothing. No one or nothing. It cannot be. There is nothing but itself. It is all-knowing. What is there to fear? Who could plot against that which is all-knowing, for example? And it is all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresence, you see. So it is all-knowing and it is all-powerful, is what the theologians will tell us. And what does God have to fear? And it has nothing to fear. It cannot possibly fear. Right? So, if it is perfect love, it has no fear. And we are told that perfect love casts out fear. We are also told if you have fear, you don't know God. If you don't know God, you don't know love. All these different ways that scriptures of the world tell us is that God is love. Now we kind of start our journey in life, in a world of rules and regulations, and we're given guides as commandments. Don't do this, don't do that. And it's good. Emmett Fox tells us that, for people who need to be reminded not to steal each other's shoes, the commandment, thou shalt not steal, is good. It's good for society. It's good for people. But when we step into the experience of oneness, when we step into the experience of love, no one has to tell us not to steal from one another. The thought wouldn't cross our mind. Can you imagine how ridiculous it would be if you put your right hand into your pants pocket and found a $20 bill and took it out and put it into your left pocket and said, I just stole $20? What? You took it from yourself. How is that? How can you do that? That's, you have no more, no less. You wouldn't possibly try to steal from yourself. That's insanity. And when we recognize each and every other person as an expression of the divine, when we recognize that God is all there is, God is omnipresence, all the presence that there is, then this idea of stealing disappears from our consciousness. It just disappears. It just would not occur to us. So of all of the 7 main aspects of God, what Emmett Fox is telling us is Love is probably the most powerful to think about. And if we cannot think of anything else, if we're trying to think of some problem in our life and you say, well, gee, what is the opposite of that? And I do this when people request treatment and they say, well, this is what's going on. The most powerful question that Lori and I learned in ministerial school is to ask, well, what do you want to have happen now? What does it look like when that's gone? What is the quality of God that it looks like when it's gone? Because we get so caught up in our problems, you see, that we forget about God. And what Emmett Fox says in this booklet is that when we learn to love God more than we love our problem, then we shall have a healing. So we identify with our problems. We claim them. They're our own. We name them. We own them. Oh, man, my back, my aching back. Oh, I've got this, or this or that or the other. And we give them a personality, and we own them, and we accept them. And what we have to do is bring ourselves to the realization that I'm having this experience. I'm having this experience, but remember we talked last week about truth. Truth is that which can sustain itself. The experience is a temporary condition. The experience is just that. It is an experience. And I'm having this experience because somehow I have, in my consciousness, allowed myself to be separated from love. God is all there is, and God is everywhere present, all presence. The presence of life as me is, in some regard, the presence of the divine. If the divine is perfect, whole, and complete, then by the very, very nature of being, I am perfect, whole, and complete. If you run down to the ocean and you take a cup of seawater and you take it to the lab and analyze it, it is the same as the ocean because it is part of the ocean. Yes, you have it in a cup. Yes, you have it in a lab. But chemically, it is the same as the ocean. It is made in the image and likeness of the ocean. It is the stuff and substance of the ocean. And as we start to consider this love being the experience of oneness, this love being the very presence of the divine right here and right now, if we recognize then that every cell, every organ, every tissue of our body, if we recognize that every customer, every client in our business is an expression of the divine, whatever it is, whatever issue we might be working on in life, if we can go back to it and find this belief in separation. Ernest Holmes says all of our problems stem from a belief in separation. And think of the beginning of the Old Testament when Adam and Eve were cast out of the garden. They're separated. Our life experience as human beings starts with this idea of separation. Our spiritual journey is removing those ideas of separation. It is growing, it is evolving in consciousness back into the unity, the singularity from which we came. And I find it almost ironic that as our concepts of the divine expand, our language expands. We have a lot more to our language now than 4,000 words that existed 2,000 years ago. But eventually we reach the point where language no longer serves us in our experience of God. We reach the ineffability, the ineffableness, the I amness, the suchness, the oneness that the different teachers tell us about, where we can just sit and be at home. We can be still and we can know. As Wendy started us today, with this, she said it's appropriate for now because there's so much fear in our society. And I had just finished, maybe 10 minutes before the service started, I had just finished messaging someone on that very topic, that there's so much fear in the world today. And I think people are afraid and they don't even know what they're afraid of. And there are organizations and there are individuals who, for their own benefit, stir that up. They keep it whipped up. At the very simplest, the media that we watch tries to awaken fear and anger as a way of keeping us watching the programming long enough to get the commercials. And then there are other people who find a way to use that confusion so that they can execute some particular agenda. But if the fear wasn't there, you see, if there was not an underlying current of fear, none of that could be successful. You might have heard the saying about the con artist that says you can't con an artist. You can't con an honest person. That wouldn't come out. You cannot con an honest person. Right? So there's a bit of larceny in the people who are taken advantage of. It's like the emails that you get that say, somebody wants to get $10 million out of their country and they're willing to give you 10% of it. Just send us your bank account information and we'll send it to you. And if people weren't dumb enough to say, oh, I'm going to get $1 million, they wouldn't send their bank account information. That's what I'm talking about. So if that underlying fear wasn't there, the unrest that we're seeing in different parts of the world over different issues, but consistently rooted in fear and anger and distrust, that would all go away. It would all go away. Perfect love casts out fear. So if you and I wish to be of service, if we wish to be helpful, not only for the benefit of our own selves, but for the benefit of the entire race, I think we can recognize then that truly, what the world needs now is love. It is love, and it is more love. But it is not the gushy, romantic kind of rock and roll love that we grew up with as teenagers. It is the true recognition of the experience of oneness with each other. If you look at the things that people do to one another, we would never do that. We would never do that to our own selves. We would never do that to our families. But it's okay to do it to others because we think they're different somehow, separated somehow. They're not like us somehow. So in our prayer, in our daily spiritual practice, if we can bring ourselves to recognize that the presence of the divine, the life of the divine, is the only presence, it is the only life that there is. That it is expressing itself in many different ways. Emmett Fox tells us in this booklet that the Egyptians said that we are all like rays of the sun. We are all that individualized expression of the sun. If we recognize that each and every person, especially the ones that we're afraid of, if there's any fear within us, that each and every one is an expression of God, and that we are one with them at that level, right? And not judged by appearances, but to judge with the righteous judgment, which is love, as we're told in the New Testament. That we can and will be helping our own self and helping everyone, because our consciousness is a part of all consciousness. We will be helping the world be a better place. And then we say, well, what about people who want to hurt us, What do we do about that? Well, we protect ourselves. But we don't do it with hate, you see. So much of our culture, so much of our society is is kind of driven by this idea that we have to get mad enough about something to do something. We have to be angry about it to do something. We have to be riled up. And as I said earlier, there are those who will rile us up for that purpose, to get us to do what they want us to do. But Emmett Fox addresses that as well in this chapter, because it comes up all the time when you say we need to love one another. So, well, what do we do with people who go around doing bad things? Well, we've got to, for their own good and for our own good, we have to isolate them from society. But we don't have to hate them while we do that. We don't have to be cruel to them while we do that. We don't have to be mean to them while we do that. Think of some of the prisons that we have now, the supermax prisons, where they're just completely designed to take all humanity away from the prisoners. The lights are on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is no day, there is no night, there are no windows. The food that they are fed is I haven't seen it, I've just read about it. Hopefully what I read was true. It's like soy meal that it's just in a blob. So even the very basic human comfort of eating food is taken away from them. And these things are not they're not necessary in order to protect society from the individual, because they're locked behind bars. They're never going to get out. It is to be mean. It is to be vindictive. It is to continue to punish them. So is there a way that we can keep people isolated? Is there a way that we can keep people from hurting themselves and from hurting us? But to not be mean, you see, to not be cruel, to not be vindictive. Because being mean and being cruel and being vindictive not only does something to that other person, but it does something to us. That means that we are mean and we are cruel and we are vindictive people. And if we believe that it is appropriate to be mean and to be cruel and to be vindictive, guess what we are going to bring into our lives? As Florence Scovel Shinn says, life's a game of boomerangs. What you toss out, you give back. What is going on in your life, and where in your life would a greater experience of love produce the opposite results? God is love. Not loving, or not just loving, but love itself, the experience of oneness itself, the experience of unity itself. Is there a sickness? Is there something that you want physically healed? Can you recognize the presence and the activity of divine in your physical body? Is there an emotion that you want to be healed? Can you recognize that love casts out all fear? Is there someone that you want to do something with, go into business with? All those sorts of things. Can we recognize that the people who come into my life are expressions of God's love? I'm not talking about forcing one particular person into your life. Right? You don't try to manipulate anyone. But what I'm saying is, what kind of a partner do I want in my business? What kind of a partner do I want in my life? Can I recognize that they are the presence of God showing up? We're all more or less a costume that God is wearing. See, God shows up in your life by means of me. God shows up in my life by means of you. Can we find that love? Can we feel that love? See? Can we catch ourselves when we slip away from that, for example, when we start to think, those people over there, those people need to be punished. Those people over there, they're this, they're that, they're the other. Can we stop ourselves and say, well, that's not loving. That's not kind. Am I doing that out of protection, or am I doing that out of meanness? See? Am I doing it because I'm afraid? Am I doing it because I am angry? Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. God is all there is. God is love. The next aspect of God that he brings us to, and the last one we're going to talk about today, is intelligence. Intelligence. Now this is kind of interesting to me that he would choose that word, intelligence. Because that's another word that we use, and everybody assumes that we all have the same definition. Of course, we don't. So the definition, the way that I understand it, now you might understand it a different way, you may understand it a better way, but the way that I understand it is intelligence is the ability to act appropriately in the situation. It's contextual. It's contextual. Right? It goes with the situation. Can you act appropriately in that particular situation? If so, you're deemed to be intelligent. And of course, this is the whole debate over the years of why IQ tests don't really measure intelligence, because if you don't have experience in those areas where the questions fall, then you're not deemed to be intelligent. So you could take me and you could put me on a fishing boat in the middle of the Atlantic and tell me it's time to catch a tuna, and I wouldn't know what to do. I got the big picture. You take a pole, you take a hook, you put bait on it. What kind of pole, what kind of hook, what kind of bait? I don't know. How deep down in the water do you have to go? I don't know. Do you bottom fish for them? Do you troll for them? I don't know. See, when it comes to that aspect of life, I am unintelligent. So intelligence then is the ability to act appropriately. And the way that I like to think about it is the divine mind knows what to do. It knows when to do it. It knows how to do it. That's intelligence. And then I couple that with all-powerful, and it is perfectly capable of doing it. Perfectly capable of doing it. So that's the way that I translate this intelligence into my prayer life. So what Emmett Fox is asking us to consider here is that in an intelligent universe, in an intelligent system, something that is an outpicturing of intelligence, there is neither cruelty, which ties into what I just talked about, meanness and vindictiveness. There's no disharmony. Everything is there for a purpose. Everything works for a purpose. There's not too much, there's not too little of anything. But there's just, it's the Goldilocks theory, there's just the right amount of intelligence. So the example he gives us is, a designer builds an engine. Imagine how fascinating that work must be to sit down. Now, of course, you would do it at a computer, but to sit down and make an engine. Here when I was up in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, at the First Flight Center up there, they learned a little bit about making the first successfully powered aircraft. The Wright brothers, or here in our country, the Wright brothers are given that attribution. Other countries claim other people. But they had to build their own engine. There were no airplane engines available at the time because nobody had done this before, And they had a machinist who worked with them, took a block of metal and made an engine, And I'm thinking, wow, can you imagine how intelligent that person was to that task, how appropriate they were able to behave to that task, to do that. But in an engine designed by an intelligent engineer, there aren't any extra parts. You don't put in parts that don't need to be there, and you don't leave anything out because it wouldn't work, right? There's just the right amount of parts. There's no disharmony. Everything is working together. The crankshaft is turning, the valves are opening, air is being sucked in through the carburetor and pushed out through the exhaust. Everything is working together in perfect harmony. And we have to recognize then that God is perfect intelligence, right? All-knowing, always knows what to do appropriately in any situation at any given time. It knows what to do. It is not cruel. It cannot punish us. It would not punish us. It would be punishing itself if it could even have the concept of punishment, which it couldn't have. See? Remember the first week I said mankind has created God in our image and likeness. We've made God into a cranky old Oriental king sitting on a throne in the sky, and that concept has to go. We have to find new words for that. We have to find new language. We have to find new ways to express that. So this perfect intelligence can neither be cruel, can neither be punishing. It does not withhold anything from anybody. It doesn't say, oh, well, Jim, I'm going to give you perfect health, but you over there, I don't like you so much. I'm not going to do that for you. The New Testament says the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. The divine gives of itself to all who can receive and who will receive. Perfect intelligence. Now I love what Emma Curtis Hopkins says is that part of our problem is that we have a belief of a mixture of evil in our good. So we think, here's the way she would put it, God is perfect intelligence. God is omnipresence. God is everywhere presence. Everywhere. All presence is the presence of God expressing itself in some way. God is intelligent. So therefore the intelligence of God is expressing itself perfectly everywhere, but not over there in those people I don't like. And we do that. We do that as human beings. We stop and think, my goodness, what buffoons are they? How stupid can they be to not agree with me? And that's our opportunity to catch ourselves and say, wait a second. That idea is coming from a belief in separation. God is perfect intelligence. So what we want to do is we want to move beyond appearances. Yes, people do crazy things. People do stupid things. But we want to recognize that in spite of all of that, the perfect intelligence is right there and knows what to do and knows how to do it. And we want to focus on that. As Holmes says, when deep calls unto deep, deep answers. We're not trying to change them. We're not trying to force them to do anything. We're trying to correct the error in our own thinking, which is a belief in separation and a belief that intelligence can be withheld. That God would do that. That God could do that. So what issues in our lives do we have that are associated with a belief in the absence of intelligence? There's no absence in omnipresence. Think about that. There's no absence in omnipresence. God is everywhere. God is all presence, but not right there. Not right here in this personal situation I don't like. We are trying to heal ourselves, our own consciousness. We are trying to resolve the error in our own thinking. We're not trying to force anyone else to behave another way. Now they may respond to us. Not even at a conscious level, they may respond to us. But that's not the objective here. Quite simply, what we are doing is we are removing every and any idea in our own consciousness that believes that we are separated from God, that separation from God is necessary, that it exists. We are wiping that out. As Dr. Holmes says, if you take a glass of water and you put a few drops of ink into it, the ink will diffuse through the whole glass of water. The glass of water will be tinted. If you put blue ink in there, the whole glass of water will be light blue, tinted blue. You can't reach back in there and get the ink out. But what you can do is put it under the tap and slowly run clear water into that glass of inky water. And over time, the pure water running in replaces all of the inky water in the glass, and you now have a glass of clear water again. What we are doing in our spiritual journey on our spiritual path, as we are working within our own consciousness, and we are discovering and we are eliminating every and any idea that believes in separation. And we are also proactively, we're not waiting for a problem to arise, but we're proactively sitting every day and contemplating the goodness of God. So there's 7 main aspects. There's 7 days in a week. You can take one a day and work with it over and over and over. And I would say that if you would do that, that would be the only thing that you would ever have to do if you dedicate yourself to that practice. So today we talked about love, the experience of oneness, and we talked about intelligence, right? Always working in harmony, always acting appropriately, never being cruel, never withholding, always providing enough and plenty. And then next week we will pick it up with, I think we're going to pick it up with soul next week, the individualized expression of God. So thank you for being with us this week. Please take time to be still, to work with these ideas, to let these ideas work with you, and then just to be still, and listen and know and let Spirit within speak to you. And so it is.